Thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. So I wanted to wait a little bit before giving my thoughts on Vesper's Host, the new dungeon that came out recently, and wow. First of all, right off the rip, all my predictions were wrong, and honestly, I'm totally fine with that, because what we got was equally cool. Secondly, spoiler alert, Thirdly, kudos to Bungie, because this dungeon, all of its lore, all of the secrets, the way you get told the story, the way you unlock it through repeated playthroughs, the way that the mystery unfolds before you, and the way every discovery feels like it's kind of important to a different set of the threads that go throughout the dungeon. Yeah, it's fantastic. The whole thing gets a big old, hey, that's neat. Finally, I wanted to let you all know that alongside a big project I've been working on, this is something that I wanted to take my time with. So, yeah, that is why it is so deeply delayed. This dungeon has a lot of lore that is incredibly intricate and crosses a lot of different story threads all at once for events to happen. But I think that it is also one of the coolest sets of stories in the game. It's not got the kind of gravity of the events that could have unfolded in Ghosts of the Deep if Oryx was resurrected, although who knows, maybe it will. And it's also not a singularly focused story, kind of like what we saw in Warlord's Ruin with Heffend and everything that happened. The situation we walk into with Vesper's Host is very complex, and there's 3 or 4 different moving parts to it, some of which we just don't immediately get answers to. This also means the dungeon contains a great degree of mystery that isn't immediately going to get answered. And you know what? I know we all crave the idea of knowing everything and unpacking all the mysteries, but actually this is kind of what I had been asking for from Bungie, and I think it's good, because seeding new mysteries is important for the future of Destiny, and this seeds some very interesting mysteries, so I'm very glad to see more of that coming from the studio. All that being said, today I'm going to guide you through what I think are the most important points of the story of Vesper's Host, and what in the world is going on with, well, everything. The anomaly, the Elixni, the messages both sent through the anomaly, and that nobody has seemingly discovered yet, the message that was sent back. So yeah, we're going to explore all of that today. But first, let me tell you about today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and is available now for free on PC and consoles. There are over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships, and the only thing they're missing is an extended vehicle warranty. Or you. I guess you as well. War Thunder has some incredibly realistic and true-to-life detail put into its vehicles, each of which is modeled with graphical fidelity in mind, and with a unique true-to-form hitbox. There are over 70 million players worldwide, and endless breathtaking battles to experience, along with a ton of content to discover that you'll love if you're a fan of military history. War Thunder also has different modes according to how much you love realism, from arcade, where you can get a fast-paced match in, all the way to simulator mode, where everything is as true to life as possible, from vehicle performance to physics. And to top it all off, like I said, it's free and available on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. New players and returning players who haven't picked up the game in 6 months can use my link down below in the description or the pinned comment to get a massive bonus pack including goodies like an exclusive vehicle decorator, the Eagle of Valor, multiple premium vehicles, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium. Download War Thunder today. Anyway, back to the lore. So, Vesper's Host. We should really start with the introduction to it all and just a brief run-through of what you'll find when you first enter it. We start with the Rogue Network quest, and the moment where the Spider contacts us about a station in orbit of Europa, which has been sending out strange signals. His agents, that he sent to the station to investigate it, have not reported in. They're probably dead. And then you open the dungeon, and you immediately hear something.
Last broadcast repeats. Threat level Omega. Object on collision vector. Total station loss expected. Threat level Epsilon. Vesper Station 2 Europa surface. We need assistance. Lives are in danger. Broadcast repeats.
That is the first time we're hearing Vesper Central, and this is where we actually begin Vesper's host, and just wow. From the outset, I want to say that if they were trying to nail the kind of Alien or Event Horizon vibes, they could have potentially gone a little darker, but still, they hit pretty hard here. The theming especially goes really gnarly. I think it's just tough to get perfectly right, because I mean, it's Destiny. If we saw a xenomorph, it'd probably be dead before one of us could finish snapping our fingers. But anyway, the station does have a danger and a sense of presence to it, and there are plenty of mysteries all wrapped up in that, including that voice that first greets us when we arrive, the station AI. This is the AI that we're initially introduced to as Vesper Central. They are a key part of basically how we're discovering all of the lore on the station, and they're not even completely powered up at the moment. In fact, they won't be fully in control or realize their true nature until way later into your exploration of the station. Wait until the icebreaker video for that one. The first encounter, we get our first good look at the anomaly though. It's clear that it's a Vex construction, but it's also clear that this thing is attached to the debris of Vesper Station by strange strands of cable-like material. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but suffice to say, no, it is not Siva. It lacks the characteristic nanite nodes, and there are no clouds of roiling nanites in proximity to the clusters or the material. It's also worth noting, before you get to the first encounter, you'll actually find this room where you need to kind of duck behind the wall to continue. But if you look at the center, you can see that there are cubes of Vex material that have basically been held in suspension here. Except the problem is, the back right suspension tube has been broken into, and that strange set of strands has reached up through a hole in the ceiling to grab whatever used to be in that containment field. Which, again, was probably the Vex cube. More on that in a little bit. That gives us way more intelligence on what that actually was. During the first encounter, you basically run through this gauntlet to power up Vesper Central, and when she is fully powered on again, you will get to explore deeper into the station. It's here in the second encounter that we have our first look at Raynix Unified, aka the 10 servitors in a trench coat. There's a lot of lore we could talk about with them, but that's for later in this video, because without lots of context, I think it's tricky to understand what's really going on here. After defeating Raynix, you move along the outer hull of the station, and it's made clear that the entire thing is trashed. It's something made worse by the abundance of arc shockwaves that are starting to overflow from the anomaly, striking near your fire team, and as the AI Vesper Central points out, arc energy shouldn't be that color, so we can tell that the power being drawn from the anomaly must be extreme. When we do actually reach the source of the corruption, we discover it to be Atrax.
Stay back! That exoframe is the center of the corruption.
So, this is Atrax. It's all her doing. We found her at last, and now we're going to put an end to her, for good, right? Well, maybe not. That might be a bit of an oversimplification. Let's explain. Atrax is the first example of an Elixni exo, but she took the technology to a completely unintended extreme. Namely, she decided that she would use the technology of the Deepstone Crypt to create dozens and dozens of copies of herself, leading to both this encounter and the encounter that we had back in the Deepstone Crypt raid, where there were at least 8 of her running around at any one time. She has a bunch of clones, and there's a possibility that she herself still lives, because she may still be stored in some data repository back on Europa, waiting to be inserted into yet more cloned bodies. It's not entirely clear. These clones conceivably could be a little bit different for other reasons too, though. I'll explain that later as well. You can probably tell why, though, immediately, because, yeah, weird smile, horrifying grin on her face, isn't it? Something has definitely corrupted her, though what it is isn't clear at all. For the moment, all we know is that she must be the leader of the vagrant forces of House Salvation that can be found here, which, as it turns out, are no longer loyal to the House of Salvation. We'll explain and explore why in a little bit. Speaking of which, when you do defeat this version of Atrax, known as the Corrupted Puppeteer, you'll hear the following out of Vesper Central.
Corrupted signal failing. Anomaly shut down complete. The corruption took control of everything. It forced the construction of the anomaly. It could have ruined so much more than it already did. And these facilities are wrecked. Population count is... nil. I'm... alone.
Vesper Central's realization that there's nobody left leads her to a place of some serious melancholy, but it does give us a few hints as to the nature of things. The center of the corruption, the signal that was leaking out and tainting everything on the station, was the Central Atrax puppeteer. When they got destroyed, the signal started to fade, and the anomaly started to power down. But as far as we're concerned, it's like we've walked into all this nonsense and there's been no explanation rendered whatsoever. There are no obvious hints as to what's happening, we just saw all of this, like uncovering a crime scene well after everything has been done and dusted. As best we can tell, the Elixni here just tried to build this Vexgate-looking thing and overloaded it with arc power, and there's no real reason as to why or understanding of what the purpose of it was. But then we get to look at this last terminal as the mission closes, and this is where the mysteries all start to unravel from. This is where our story in Vesper's Host really begins.
Message in abeyance loop transferred to anomaly. Destination incomprehensible. This message was not authorized.
What does all that mean? Well, a message had been held in the system of the station for a while. The abeyance loop implies that it was basically waiting around in storage like a plane circling a busy airport before the air traffic controller allows it to land, waiting for that moment, that point at which it could move on. Most importantly though, it was sent to the anomaly with a destination that was seemingly incomprehensible. This is important, and the reason why it's important is because it tells us what the damn thing in the sky is. To put it really simply, the anomaly isn't a portal like many of us might have initially guessed. It's a phone. It's a massive communications array. It links us to, well, God knows where that incomprehensible place may be. This is where our investigation begins, and it starts to give us the answer to the first major question, which is really, what the hell is that thing in the skybox, and how the hell was it made? The purpose of it has now been deconstructed, but the how was it made bit? Yeah, we'll go into that next. This means we're going to need to talk about the lore of the Fallen for a second, and it also means we need to talk about the lore of the inhabitants of the station prior to the collapse. I am, of course, talking about Clovis Bray and his research staff. But first things first, let's start with the people who actually built this thing, and that was the Fallen. But that being said, they did so with some pretty serious assistance. Cutting to the chase, the Fallen on the station were vagrants from the House of Salvation, who abandoned Eramis' base at Reese Reborn in order to flee to the station. All this was done with the concept that they'd be able to live freely on the station, free of the rules of House Salvation, free of anything else, free of loyalty, free from all the war that had been consistently going on the surface. But in doing so, they would require resources, and for the Elixni in particular, that would mean ether. But as luck would have it, the engineers amongst that group of vagrants discovered old human schematics, something that they thought could be spliced to act as an ether generator. Hooking it up to their servitors would result in a limitless supply of ether and a life free from the troubles of hunger. This is first explored in the lore tab of the helmet for the dungeon armor, which... I'm just going to say this too, it's really nice to have these back. I lamented the fact that the raid gear from Salvation's Edge and the gear from the dungeon previously, aka Warlord's Ruin, was just lacking lore tabs generally. Having these back, even if it's not as many as we had in previous instances, is really nice. It means we can get closer to a comprehensive story about what happened. I think that there is definitely a balance that maybe can be struck between how much of it is done in-game and how much is told through lore tabs. But so far this is nice. It helps to reverse a trend where endgame activities are losing their lore tabs, and as a result, we have fewer chances to seed more mysteries. Anyway, here's the lore tab in question. 6 days since arrival. Metal groans, power lines hum, things skitter in the pipes. Uraskis picks her way through rubble with a double armload of scrap. She's finally growing out of Drek scale. Lower arms regrown all the way down to her talons. but she's still slight enough to duck through the smallest shafts of their new home. An orbital station, ancient and damaged, but fixable, everyone thinks. The station hasn't been inhabited for a very long time, but Yuraskis catches herself looking over her shoulder repeatedly. Her spine prickles as an eerie mechanical voice speaks above her head. Some old message from humans, Karo said, nothing to worry about, but unsettling all the same. It's a relief to get to the workshop. She kicks at the doorframe. "Scrap delivery!" Karo is smaller than Yuraskis, still true Drek. Even so, people pay attention to him because he hatched with 8 eyes. That means he's handsome, 1 in a million lucky, and he's sharp. He was in on the plan from the beginning. Yuraskis only got tapped because she's his egg cousin. Karo gestures without looking up from his screens. "Put it anywhere." The workshop is one of the creepier rooms on the station, in Yuraski's opinion. It's filled with metal tables bolted to the floor. They had to clear out a whole pile of empty Vex bodies before the room was usable. Yuraskis tries not to touch anything as she sets down her bundle. "What are you working on?" "Analyzing some old mechanical blueprints. If we splice into the systems, there's as much to use up here as down on the surface. And there aren't any Vex up here, no Hive, no Lightbearers." "No Kells," Yuraskis says firmly. "No Kells," Karo adds. "Plenty of ether if these blueprints hold true, though. There's this machine. It's in 2 parts. One collects energy, one uses it. We just need the collector for the servitors, and we're set for life." He tilts one of the screens her way. Ether for life, up here in the cold dark. It makes everything worth it. The overwhelming feeling of fear as they escaped from Europa, the careful navigation around the hazards on the station as they work to make it livable. And yes, Yuraskis might get shooed out of engineering meetings she doesn't understand, but nobody will cut off her arms for insubordination. She flexes her lower hands and leans in to study their future. There's more context on the device that can be told in the next few sections of Lore Tabs. In particular, take this small excerpt from the Arms Lore Tab. 17 days since arrival. Karo is busy all the time talking to the Vandals and Marauders too big to even look at Yuraskis. They're working together to build an ether refinery, using old human blueprints from the station. He rarely has time for Yuraskis. So the Fallen found these plans that they decided they could turn into an ether generator. But where the hell did they get them? Where did they find something like this in a human research station? And why did it end up not being an ether generator? Well, one step at a time, I suppose. As for where they got the plans from, yeah, them discovering them on Vesper Station and Vesper Central is not too out of the question, because as it turns out, this station housed the entirety of Clovis Bray's more sensitive research projects that were potentially going to interfere with other research efforts on Europa if they ever got into contact with them. I hear some of you asking the question, but isn't this a Vex Gate? Why did Clovis know how to build a Vex Gate? Well, yeah, valid question. It is complicated, though. If you go back to the Clovis Bray journals from Beyond Light and its collector's edition, and you give them a rereading, you'll learn that Clovis Bray was brought out to Europa in search of clarity, but that also he was sent out here at the behest of visions from the K1 artifact on the moon. And it's in these journals that I think we can see a really relevant revelation to all of this. It's something that also led to the creation of the Glassway portal down on Europa, another Vex construct built partially at the behest of Clovis Bray. The excerpt from the journal reads as follows. Entry 6. A gate. Of course, Clarity Control is inviting me to make a gate. The messenger hypothesis. Aliens would seek the most efficient method of interstellar contact. Starships are slow, fragile, and massive. It is easier to send a set of instructions for a message receiver or a construction blueprint for a portal. This explains the reports of visions and paranoia at the K1 site. The idiots were receiving a message, but they failed to divine the true purpose. Or perhaps the invitation was only intended for me. and it is an invitation. But I will need more data and more talent to answer it. I feel that the gate Clarity Control wants me to build is not any form or product of Clarity itself. The design, I think, is Vex, those pestilential nuisances encountered on Venus and occasionally elsewhere. If I need a Vex gate to fulfill Clarity Control's purpose, then I will make a Vex gate in the simplest way. I will have a Vex build it for me. So Clovis then went on to capture a Vex from the Ishtar Collective research teams on Venus in a raid that was conducted on their facilities, and as a result, he got his hands on a Vex mind that was capable of building the Glassway portal, which you can now see at the end of the Glassway strike. But Clovis clearly wasn't done there, because thanks to the Vex mind referred to as the Unbodied Mind, he was actually able to get these plans together to build something more. Take a listen to this.
Dr. Bray intended to integrate his technology into a Vex mind. He hypothesized the fusion would give him an interface he understood.
So Clovis Bray was planning on using a Vex mind in order to construct this interface with Vex technology that a human could use, and in doing so he would probably have built the anomaly himself, something which would have then been able to be, well, take a listen to what he intended to do with it.
Dr. Bray, I could kill you myself. This is why our work focused on the unbodied mind. Dr. Bray thought there were types of Vex unseen on Europa. Powerful Vex he could learn from. The plan was that the mind would build him a controlled window for observation. Tidy, tight, safe. He thought he could control a Vex mind so perfectly it would do everything he wanted.
Like an AI of his own creation. Like you.
Turns out you can't control everything forever.
So this was Clovis's plan, and this was what the Salvation Vagrants found. They saw that they could splice them into an ether converter initially, which is what they first moved to make with this massive thing. Of course, it never ended up being an ether generator in the end. It ended up being a comms relay of sorts. It's described by Vesper Central as a window from which Clovis could observe more powerful Vex. But it's clear that the whole array is capable of sending and receiving signals to do this. So hopefully that helps to answer the first mystery in all this, which is, again, about what the Fallen were doing building this thing and where they found the plans and what the hell was going on. The massive thing in the skybox is basically a giant radio that Clovis Bray and his team created the designs for with the assistance of Vex technology. We can use it to contact things on the other side, and they can theoretically use it to contact us back. More on that at the very end of the video, and that is the bit that I think no one has discovered yet, unless it happens while I'm recording this video. The next big question: how the hell did the Eliksni build this thing? Well, the answer to that one really gets interesting, and it concerns the wires. You know, these wires that are literally all over the station, that you can see encasing the walls and floors, covering all the typical Eliksni architecture inside the Ketch, and even making smaller versions of the anomaly inside the station. Don't believe me? Take a look at this thing over here. Thanks, by the way, to Lunar Sphinx for giving me this image. These wires look like Siva, but I promise you they are not. They reach out from the remains of Vesper Station to the anomaly itself and are absolutely brimming with energy by the end of it. We learn more about them in the lore tabs for the armor of the dungeon, in particular the lore tab of the chest armor. 23 days since arrival. The ether generator is taking shape. A big, ringed shell set a safe distance from the hull, cradled in wiring. Their crew's 3 spinners are busy all the time making more cabling. So clearly the Fallen built this, but you see, I've buried the lead somewhat on an earlier bit of audio. There's more to all of it than that, because the Salvation Vagrants might also have had help with the design from a Vex mind or from something else. Take a listen again to the full conversation about the Vex mind and what the Spider says at the beginning about the cables in particular.
Loading images of the station. That's not Eliksni engineering. No! The drag past the first Malt has better cable management.
Dr. Bray intended to integrate his technology into a Vex mind. He hypothesized the fusion would give him an interface he understood. A control panel on a programmable Vex mind. If the programming jumped species once... I need time to run through the datasets you powered back up. Reassembling corrupted archives takes a great deal of processing.
So here's the interesting bit. The 3 spinners that were making wiring constantly might have been linked in with that Vex mind, which was Clovis's key to building out the anomaly potentially in the future. The technological jump that's been talked about by Vesper Central there might explain why the wiring looks as it does and why it's so messy. Spider doesn't even think that this was the work of an Elixni, so there's got to be some kind of outside influence here. But there was something else that also created the anomaly. This is clearly a Vex design, and it was probably done with some assistance from a Vex mind of some sort. But the thing is, again, something else helped to create the anomaly. This wasn't just the Elixni. And yes, it's here that we need to talk about Atrax, or rather the corrupted puppeteer, because this is possibly not the real Atrax. This might just be a cloned frame that got corrupted. Regardless, the Spider pointed out this most crucial thing, which was that the wires were not Elixni work, and that is a critical piece of information to understand because it implies to us the real nature of the corrupted puppeteer. Whatever they once were, they are no longer an Elixni. So, with that being said, we know now that there are 2 potential groups that contributed to the creation of the anomaly. Either this was done with the assistance of a Vex mind, or this was done with the assistance of Atrax's puppets, or it was perhaps a combination of both. Talking about Atrax is important though, because her presence, or at least the presence of her body as the corrupted puppeteer, tells us that there's another unknown force at work here. Atrax looks corrupted, but it's not Vex corruption. That much is obvious from the outset. So that's really our next pair of questions. What do we know about her, and the frames that we face? And what do we know about the presence that has corrupted her? Understanding more about these questions helps us to understand how the Elixni built this ring. Yes, they used spinners for the wiring, and everything was done with the assistance of either Atrax or a Vex mind, but understanding what the hell the corrupted puppeteer is crucial to this now. Diving into all of this, I think we need to first acknowledge that we don't have an answer at all to the question of who actually corrupted Atrax and what the hell's going on with her. But we can definitely tell a few different possibilities about this corrupted puppeteer and what's going on. However, I want to rule out a few possibilities that people might be thinking of at first. Namely, I want to rule out anything that has gone wrong with exo experimentation, and the idea that this might have caused some madness. When exos do start to experience mental breaks due to DER or other comparable conditions, they aren't likely to go on this mad spree of building great devices. It's much more likely that they'll start to fold in on themselves mentally as their mind realizes that it's in a body that is not the original body that it was in. All of this is to say that we can't easily explain why Atrax is corrupted, or what corrupted Atrax. But whatever did corrupt the puppeteer clearly has a motive, and that motive is wanting to build the anomaly. It wanted it to be established. The reason why it wanted this thing is anyone's guess. I previously questioned whether the corruption was a result of an interaction with an entity of darkness like the Winnower, hence the explanation of the name Vesper's host, but something I didn't anticipate was that the Atrax clones could lend a different meaning to the word host. Instead of it being a singular host that welcomes in the presence of darkness, instead it could be a plural host. In other words, the Salvation Vagrants and the Puppeteer's army are that host, a war host, so to speak. So maybe we can hold off on the idea of Winnower corruption for now, although I don't rule it out completely. As for the Puppeteer's frames and what they did on Vesper Station, that's all explained within the story of the Elixni as told through the lore tabs on the armor. And I won't go through everything, but the story that follows is all about that Elixni we heard about earlier, Uraskis, a dreg who is on the tail end of growing into a Vandal. She confers with a contemporary of hers, the dreg that we heard about earlier, whose name is Caro, who has 8 eyes, and throughout the story told in the armor, she watches as the station slowly starts to descend into complete and utter madness as various Eliksni throughout the station start to go missing. It starts with the higher echelons of the Vagrant crew and slowly works its way down. As they go missing, the station gets quieter and more eerie. Yuraskis also starts hearing ominous sounds, sudden shrieks that cut out the scraping of metal on metal, and eventually she loses contact with Karo. But a full third of the crew has also gone missing at this point, so it's hardly surprising. By the 39th day of the crew's expedition into the Vesper station, they've reached the point where the servitors they brought with them are all crowded together in one nervous bundle, and it becomes clear that there is something out there stalking the halls, and it's starting to intimidate just about everyone who's still left. But the engineering crew are still building the anomaly. Work goes on, even in the face of this threat, which the Eliksni of the crew describe as having Eliksni eyes, but eyes that do not shine with ether and instead glow with something unknown. Eventually, Yuraskis encountered a marauder who was pretty strange. In particular, his eyes were apparently what was really unusual, that and the fact that he didn't even look at Yuraskis for what followed. He ordered her to approach, and knowing that this is a horror movie she didn't want to be in, Yuraskis ran. She starts running and she finds the rest of the missing crew, who start to descend upon her from throughout the corridors of the station in a seemingly similar fashion to the one marauder. It should be clear at this point that these Eliksni are somehow being influenced by the puppeteer in some horrifying manner. They're almost like zombies or someone under some enchanter's spell. Yuraskis would then hear a familiar voice calling out to her, Karo's voice. He led her through vents and into a different part of the station, helping her escape this horde. But when she asked what was wrong with the rest of the crew, Karo declared that there was nothing wrong with them at all. This was the unfortunate moment where he was really starting to show his hand, and where we get the hint as to what might have happened on Vesper Station. This next bit is a little bit of a guess from me, but this is what I think it was. Karo clearly still has his wits about him, otherwise he would have just been part of the corrupted horde. He's not one of the puppets under the control of Atrax and the clones. However, he stops and pushes Yuraskis towards the next room and directly into the arms of Atrax, who is known only as the White Captain to Yuraskis. My theory about why all of this is as it is this. The engineers were the only ones who were allowed to stay as they were because they were needed to direct some of the plans. But for the most part, the crew was integrated into what would be known as the White Captain hive mind, that state where all of their eyes were wrong, and where they didn't quite look at the people they were talking to, where they willingly followed the will of the corrupted puppeteer. Note, they did not become Atrax copies, that's not how this works. They became mindless thralls that danced to the whims of the White Captain. The various Eliksni that fell under its sway became a part of that hive mind, a being that reached out across the many bodies at its disposal to accomplish its singular task of completing the anomaly. I think the engineers were allowed to keep their independence, but they also started to change their behaviors due to the presence of the White Captain hive mind. And we can tell all of this because of the presence of the machine priests. An important note of context here is that the House of Salvation does not use servitors in the same way that other Eliksni groups do. They are not necessarily a more traditional house like the House of Devils, where their servitors would have been perfectly spherical, or like one of the houses such as the House of Light, where they're still revered. No, the House of Salvation instead scrapes down and defiles their servitors for parts, keeping only what is necessary for ether production. So their relationship with everything is very different. This means they have specifically shirked worship of the Great Machine, and this is why they defile their servitors. It's a sign that they no longer believe in the divinity of machines or the Traveler. And yet, here the Salvation Vagrants are, with machine priests in control. I think these are the higher-ranking older captains that were pulled into the hive mind first. They now act as priests to a new divinity, and perhaps they even give us an explanation as to why the Ranix servitors that can be found on the station are the way they are. They appear to be bound by the same technology that has covered the rest of the station, the Eliksni-guided Vex technology that is now also under the sway of the White Captain. Doing this has allowed them to bond together and create a single unified frame, which is constantly replicating more parts and pieces to itself in a wild fashion. This is my best guess as to what's happening with the Ranix frame, at least. Keep in mind, I think that the reason why all of these parts are getting continuously integrated is the same reason why it has a mechanic known as integration. This is something which explains what the Vex technology in there is potentially doing, if this is the reason for it. Having a servitor generally using Vex technology to create more of these copies of itself makes a certain degree of sense, because it would then be abducting resources, or just anything it could possibly get its hands on, and then repurposing it. This is what servitors do with ether generally, but I think the technology that has been imbibed within Ranix has changed it fundamentally, and now it's just growing out of control, and there are parts and pieces falling off of it as it can't possibly contain itself within this unified frame. A lot of that is guesswork though, so if someone has a better explanation, or if there's someone else within the dev team that wants to go ahead and add context, I'm very happy to take a back seat to whatever they say. Regardless, the hive mind of the White Captain would continue to build the anomaly up until the moment of its completion, and Uraskis would now be a part of their number. The context we get from the last lore tab in the armor gives us the perspective of the hive mind itself. It's very important as a result, and I think it is well worth listening to. Time is suspended. All that remains is the appointed task. The spinners craft tow ropes, power lines, and all-purpose cable, hour after hour without rest. The White Captain moves among them with her many limbs. She feels what they feel, knows what they know as soon as they know it. She uses this information to align, and together they build something new in this home they've found. Every Drek yearns for more arms than their captain allows. Every four-eyed Eliksni looks with envy upon the eight-eyed. Every Kel and Archon raises their horns as high as they dare. Now, together, they are as no Eliksni before them. A miracle. A being of hundreds of limbs, lungs, and eyes. The captain gently touches the limb previously named Uraskis. Her appointed portion of the great diagram flowers to life in her head. Legs stumbling under her, she moves towards the station's prow. One limb may be unsteady, but the greater shared body is strong. Faint noises make no sense. Words she doesn't understand. The un-Eliksni babbling of a foreign mind. The only mind that matters is the White Captain's. Hands connect circuits and power lines. The diagram is beautiful but difficult to grasp. She searches for the right shape, the right configuration that will let power flow through its appointed channels. The work goes on, until the hands tie off the last cable. The eyes look up. The knees buckle in joy. The heart surges along the bright paths of the diagram. Somewhere in the joined crowd, a single hand throws a single lever. The mind rejoices. Orange light flares to life in the cold dark. It flares in hundreds of souls. Uraskis is there. Somewhere. Whatever consciousness has taken over the White Captain is genuinely alien. Alien even to the Fallen. We don't know of a hive mind quite like this, and it's important to state that because it helps us rule out a few groups that could potentially be in control here. For example, the hive mind experienced joy when activating the anomaly. They rejoiced. The hundreds of souls within it all fled. These details matter because the only thing close to a hive mind that we know of is the Vex. Well, that and one other, but for the time being I don't think this is the Vex, because they don't experience emotions in the same way we do. As Praedith said it in the Vault of Glass, the Vex have no hope, no imagination, no drive, no fear. All they have is the pattern. And I don't think that means they would be rejoicing. I don't think that means they would have a concept of a soul in quite the same way. I think it would be fair to say that whatever's controlling these Eliksni is something we've not seen in the game before, something relatively new, something with its own reasons for intruding. And whilst I think that generally it's hard to pin down what this hive mind would be, there is one other consequence that I want to talk about in a later video where I go over some lore from Well, last episode that I never got to cover. And it's a very long shot, but hear me out. There's a hive mind that exists like this in Destiny, and it's from the Kugu. The Kugu were a people that were destroyed in the Books of Sorrow with the assistance, as it turns out, not just of the Hive, but of the Black Fleet and the Witness. The consciousness of the Kugu as a people was preserved within the final shape, and when the Witness was destroyed, it turned out that Maya Sundaresh's Echo contained the memories and consciousness of a Kugu commander known as Tikal. The Kugu, as it happens, operated in some kind of hive mind that saw their entire fleet reacting as if it was a single individual of thousands of different vessels. This is all theoretical, but I think this means that the Kugu are the closest fit that could possibly be the source of this hive mind. With all that being said, though, there's no way to confirm that. With Maya having been defeated, it's possible that her Echo would be able to branch out on its own, or it's possible that it too would have retreated deep into the Vex network. Or perhaps this is Maya's subtle way of reaching out to influence us further, and the Kugu hive mind is just a side effect of all this. That being said, I don't think I'm going to pin down the source of the corruption to anything just yet, because ultimately we have no idea what this is. That being said, the Kugu hive mind is also potentially different because there's the chance of individuality to exist within it. It's more of a connected consciousness than a true hive mind. There may be one individual at the head of the pack who has overwhelming control. In the case of our story, it was Tikal, but the individuals within that mass were still connected, and they could still be individuals. Tikal occasionally does have to take direct control of the massive war vessels as he's guiding them. It's a chorus and symphony of individual hearts and minds, much less this singular, overwhelming will where the only relevant mind is the White Captain. Regardless, the whole thing is really unclear. To understand more about this hive mind, we'd need to know more, but this is just one of those mysteries that Bungie is seeding. Whatever the corruption was at the center of the corrupted puppeteer, it is likely the source of this hive mind. So whatever it is, we should keep an eye out for it. It's here that I also wanted to pivot back to the message that was sent through the portal, and I wanted to make it incredibly clear that we should separate correlation and causation. Whatever hive mind entity controlled the puppeteer might not necessarily be an entity on the other side of the anomaly. So that's mostly what we can tell or not tell about the White Captain and its hive mind, something which is genuinely unique and rather unsettling as far as we know. I guess the question then ends up being what other information is there on the station, and this leads us to the message that was held and was then sent into the anomaly. Namely, was it sent by the White Captain hive mind or by Clovis Bray? The initial message that was sent into the anomaly does hint at the idea that it might have actually been Clovis Bray, as it came from the station's architecture directly, and, well, take a listen to the contents of the message.
I suppose I have you to thank for bringing me out of standby, visitor.
I sent the Guardian out to save your station. So, what denomination does your thanks come in? Glimmer? Here always. Information?
Anomalies powered down. That means I've already given you your survival. But the message that went through wiped itself before my cache process could save a copy. And it's not the initial ping through the anomaly I'm worried about. It's the response.
Oh, that's disappointing, isn't it? We didn't get a copy of it. Or did we?
The reply coming back through the anomaly let me scrape a facsimile of the original message. It was a locating ping. The content was irrelevant. The signal was the message, "Hello, world." And something overrode my lock on the anomaly. Allowed it to power up enough to receive the reply.
Who could possibly override your word when all Vesper Station is at your beck and call?
I need Dr. Bray's personal command algorithm. With station root access, I can keep the anomaly from ever powering back up.
So yeah, the message was most likely Clovis's doing and not the doing of the White Captain. The question then becomes, is this Clovis who's doing this now and who somehow has permissions of this from down on Europa, or is this just one of the way belayed orders that has been waiting to go on for a very long time? Something that was done way back in the Golden Age past. We can't tell whether it was the past or present Clovis that allowed that first message to be sent. But hold on just a second, because both of these lines of dialogue talk about a response from the anomaly.
And it's not the initial ping through the anomaly I'm worried about. It's the response. The reply coming back through the anomaly let me scrape a facsimile of the original message. It was a locating ping. The content was irrelevant. The signal was the message, "Hello, world." And something overrode my lock on the anomaly. Allowed it to power up enough to receive the reply.
You hear that? A response. But we haven't found a response anywhere. Nowhere in the secret dialogue is there a response. And that's because this response is not something you find on the quest, and it's not something that's a part of the Icebreaker Catalyst. It's an entirely different hidden secret. I have no idea how I am the first person in the community, seemingly, that has pointed this out and discovered it. At very least, when I'm recording this script, it still isn't on YouTube. That might change, so maybe I'm not the first person to have discovered this, but I might as well be the first if someone hasn't been the one to beat me to the punch. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we did get a message sent into the anomaly. That was the very first message that we saw when we finished the first run of the dungeon. However, at a certain point through your adventures through the dungeon, if you finish the first encounter again, you can see this wall panel. And as it turns out, the anomaly sent something back. Take a listen.
Warning. Unauthorized message coming through the anomaly. Data follows. Lodi transmitting. Status Moonsick. Adrift. Odysseus protocol active. It repeats from there. Do you recognize the code?
Again, I don't know how I'm the first to find this. It's literally right there, next to the final boss of the first encounter. Like, it's really not hidden. Like, it's just there. You had to walk over to it. I did it by accident. I assumed someone else had already found it. But even as I was doing this with my team, no one had found it. So, yeah, cool, I guess. Anyway, let's see what we can figure out from this reply, because this is the other side of it. This is what's looking at the other side of the anomaly. This is what everyone was building this for. This is what people were trying to contact. And it seems surprisingly human? Let's break this down a little bit. First of all, the message is in English, and it seems to be using some kind of code parameters that we might expect of a civilized group of humanity. And that's an interesting start already. It means that, well, there's got to be some kind of human influence on whatever's on the other end of it. If we sat there and saw some talk about the Great Machine and blessings be to Reese and all those who left it in the Great Whirlwind's calamitous aftermath, like, yeah, we'd see that it was an Elixni thing. But no, this is human. So, breaking it down line by line, we start with Lodi transmitting, which gives us a name to put to our contact on the other side. That could be a ship or a shipboard AI that's transmitting, but my money is on the latter. Who knows really, there is no way to tell at the moment. Status Moonsick Adrift brings up an interesting note as to the state of the sender or their crew if this is a shipboard AI that's helping to keep people alive. Moonsick is an archaic term that essentially means that the person has suffered a mental collapse of some sort. Generally, this is seen as a way of expressing that someone has gone mad or is completely deranged. The adrift part of this might be the reason as to why that's the case. If the crew has been forced to survive in deep space for this whole time, then who knows what's happened to them and how they might have needed to regress to survive, or what strange customs and cultures they might need to express their efforts of survival. For all we know, this could be a reference to Lodi's state of being if this is an AI that's the one communicating with us and if the AI is the only person in the picture. And that brings up really interesting questions, because this asks us to question whether Destiny's AIs can suffer rampancy as they do in other former Bungie IPs, such as Marathon and Halo. For context, this is a very Bungie thing to happen, so it's not at all impossible. The only difference is that it would be a process that doesn't occur because of age as it would in Halo. Instead, the madness would need to come from psychological factors that the AI was exposed to. And for reference, these would need to be extreme. Failsafe might have split her emotional inhibition subroutines when she saw her whole crew die and was abandoned for centuries, but she's still actually pretty sane and stable, all things considered. Even if she talks in two voices, it's unquestionably still one person. For an AI in Destiny to go properly rampant? I mean, we've never seen that before. It'd need to be something truly disturbing, an alien force of some kind with an influence beyond what we would typically expect. Perhaps. Then again, our message was being sent to an incomprehensible destination, and from this incomprehensible destination, we received this message back. So maybe this is just the really unlucky AI that ended up piloting the Destiny version of the Event Horizon. Who knows? Speaking of journeys into the unknown, though, the final note of Odysseus Protocol active is our biggest hint that this reply is from something or someone of human origin, be it an artificial intelligence or not. This is explicitly our culture, and it hasn't been twisted by the Elixni, like, say, Achilles was twisted into Achelux. Whatever's on the other side of the anomaly, sending the return message from this incomprehensible destination, undoubtedly it's of humanity's own making. The questions unfolding after all of these revelations are as follows. Firstly, did this group, or perhaps just this AI, this ship, whatever Lodi is, cause the corruption of Atrax? As an addendum to that, if that is the case, and if the answer to that first question is yes, what kind of technology did Lodi have that would have allowed them to create a hive mind of this nature, capable of completely possessing a different species that they probably haven't met? Secondly, how did Lodi know to send this transmission when the anomaly hadn't even been built until recently? And thirdly, perhaps most pressingly, why did the hive mind of the White Captain want the anomaly to be completed? That sounds like it overlaps with the first question, but let's remember, it's an assumption that Lodi was the source of this hive mind and of the corruption. If the corruptor of the White Captain and Lodi are two different groups, then that fourth hand that corrupted the White Captain, yeah, that's the real nemesis here. That's the real enemy, and we need to be wary of that because it doesn't necessarily overlap with Lodi. Whilst I wonder if we might need to do a search and rescue mission for Lodi and its crew if it is a ship, I still wonder if that darker hand is moving forces behind the scenes and is influencing us and the Lodi crew to somehow reunite. If that is the case, I wonder why they want that. I get the sense that whatever is at work here is a darker force, and it wants to bring us and this other group into contact somehow. But what's more troubling is that someone didn't just want this message sent, they wanted the reply to be received as well. They specifically overrode the safeties and permissions put in place by Vesper Central when she powered down the anomaly. It was powered back up to be allowed to receive this message. That means that they had to have broad knowledge of the situation at hand, the anomaly, its capabilities, and the possibilities of what could be sent and received. They might have known that there was a message waiting to be sent once the anomaly was complete. They might have known that someone would be waiting on the other side to receive it, and they might have known that we would be there to receive a reply from Lodi in return. In many circumstances, I would happily jump to the conclusion that this was Clovis Bray waiting to contact the gods on the other side and establish his divinity, or attempting to discern what was going on with the Vex and simply trying to test this device that was finally completed. Even if all of this could have been explained by a more run-of-the-mill instance of Clovis just trying to build a means of commandeering the Vex, maybe that wouldn't be too surprising, but it also doesn't explain why the signal on the other side was human, and how it got there in the first place. That, combined with the fact that we've never seen anything quite like the White Captain hive mind in the game before, tells me that we may be dealing with something greater. Granted, again, the Kugu theory still stands, but I don't think it's solid enough to be the answer on its own. I can't confirm it, but I get the gut feeling that we're about to discover something even greater with all of this, and that this is just the first move of an unseen hand that is placing the pieces on a chessboard, and that we are one such piece. And the scariest thing of all is, I don't know why, but this doesn't feel right. Someone got something out of us communicating through the anomaly and from someone communicating back to us. And I don't know what their motive is, I don't know what their reason for having the anomaly powered back up is, I don't know what the point of all of it is, but I get the feeling someone wanted all this done. And that is our big takeaway from all of this. Something doesn't feel right, but at the heart of it all, the anomaly was built. It is a communications relay. We sent something through it, and something else responded. And whatever that thing is, it seems like it was human. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Remember to sign up today for free on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation using my link down below in the description or the pinned comment. New players and anyone returning after 6 months of inactivity will get a huge bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles, 100k Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Of course, there is so much more to this dungeon. We can go into more depth about it in future videos. In particular, I want to do the full look at the story of the Fallen and the House of Salvation vagrants that are found here, the lore behind the Icebreaker, the lore of the AI that most of you will know as Vesper Central, and of course, the lore of Clovis Bray and his staff that worked on the station back in the Golden Age. But in this video, I just wanted to hit the big themes and give an idea of the important stuff behind Vesper's host. Hopefully it was well worth the wait. And hopefully I helped to explain what the anomaly is and why it might be important. And hey, hopefully no one beat me to the punch of that message being received either. If so, that's really exciting. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like and let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments section. And for more stories and lore from worlds near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Parodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.